Over to Glenda.
Just started, yeah. Like Emily said, go ahead, clap. My husband was really the one who got me into the open source thing. You might notice this is PowerPoint on Windows. I still do use Windows for stuff, but he did really got me interested when I was complaining that I wanted Photoshop, and he goes, well, there's a free one you can use, and that just hooked me right there. So who am I? We already mentioned I have a husband, Tristan Rhodes. Many of you have probably seen him. He did a presentation on VIATA on Thursday, and we've got a booth up in the sponsor area. I have a 15-month-old daughter. You've probably seen her running around too on Thursday or today. Or if not, you'll probably see a lot of pictures because she's definitely my favorite thing to take pictures of. I'm also CEO of our business that we own. My husband and I, Utah OpenTech, we help businesses implement open source solutions, mainly SwitchVox phone systems, and then also the VIATA routing appliances. And then something happened there, but I'm also a quality engineer out at ATK Launch Systems on the Space Shuttle program. So now that that's out of the way, just to show you some of the stuff that I've done in GIMP. Do cards. This is one for my daughter's birthday, just a collage of her every month. You know, editing pictures, making them part color, part black and white. This is one I took of my nephew that I took and then edited in GIMP. The same nephew right there. And I should have pulled up the original picture so that you could see, but that is a lot of GIMP on there to blur out the background and stuff. This is my daughter's birth announcement that we did. Some things we were playing around with, digital scrapbooking, sticking some stuff on there. Another picture of my daughter, one of my favorites too, as mean as that sounds, but some digital scrapbooking, like I said, and then just some more little card things. Oh, and then more digital scrapbooking. That's my newest hobby that I've been playing with GIMP on, so editing the pictures and then digital scrapping them. I think this resolution has screwed up some of my stuff, but for downloading GIMP, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but if you go to gimp.org, click on the downloads button. It's kind of interesting. GIMP for Windows is the first download, but it also has it down below for other operating systems. So you can just go down there and download the system. When you open GIMP, the first thing that opens is the GIMP tool window. If you've just downloaded GIMP for the first time, you'll notice my window might look a little bit different than some of yours because I've configured it. I've moved around some of my tool buttons and added some things down here to the bottom of the window. Online, there's a really good tutorial site. The website is meetthegimp.org. And so if you're looking for GIMP tutorials, that's one of the best places I would suggest to go, just because it's a German guy, but he actually does video casts, so you can actually watch him working on his screen and he'll explain it all to you. You can stop, rewind, go back and look at things. But I think it's the second video actually goes into how to customize GIMP for your own preferences, put things in where you want them and move your buttons around, add and remove buttons from that window. So from this window, this is where you'll open your files to work on. You can get to all of the tools. You can see the different tool buttons up there. And then, like I said, down below, you can add various dialogues to that window. I'm not sure what it comes with default, but mine, it's got like a tool dialog and then a layers, colors, and then an undo window. So the file menu, that's where you're going to go in to open your images. You can just go File, Open. It's pretty self-explanatory. Again, I'm just kind of doing this for background. But File, Open to open your images. If you wanted to add more dialogues to that, to open some of those, you can go to File and then Dialogues, and it'll give you a whole slew of menus you can open. Like if you want a separate window for your layers, so they're in their own little window, a separate window for your channels, a separate window for your undo history. You can open all of that, and then once those are opened, you can drag those into that main window so that they're all on one window if that's what you choose. And I'll show you that in just a minute where some of those are on mine once I get out of this PowerPoint. Some of the tools I'm going to talk about today, the main ones that I use, I've highlighted. All of them do different things. The main ones I use, there's a rectangle select, and what that does is that helps you choose a rectangle area on your picture. There's an ellipse select, and that helps you choose circular areas. There's a magic, I think in Photoshop it's called the magic lasso, so that's what I always call it, but it's a freehand tool. You can just draw around an area freehand, and it'll select that area for you. There's fuzzy select and color select, and those will choose areas based on color. On the second row, there's the move tool, which is really important, especially if you're going to do any kind of digital scrapbooking, the move tool in GIMP. There's also a, I didn't get the crop on there because I added that later. There's a crop tool and a rotate tool. And then down on that third row, there's a text tool, a paint tool, and a cloning tool. Like I said, there are other ones in there that are important, but for what I'm going to show you today, these are the main ones that I use. So for the rest of the presentation, what I'm going to go over, I'm actually going to close out the PowerPoint and actually just do some of these for you, go through some of these, how I do them for you. I'm going to go over black and white, sepia, a conversion I like to call a chocolate black and white. I'm going to talk a little bit about layers and layer masks, and then also some about sharpening. So let me get out of here. And we'll open up. You'll see I've already got GIMP opened up on my screen. Like I was saying before, some of the things I like to have on my, my window that you can either have in a separate dialog or you can pull them over into this main window is the tool option. And basically what this window does is it shows you all the different options for whichever tool you have selected. So if I click on paintbrush, it tells me what mode I'm using, the opacity, how dark I want that paint to be, the brush size, the scale, so how big that brush is. One of the cool things with the newest version of GIMP is you can actually scale your brush size so that it'll go to different sizes without having to make a new brush. And then just some other features down there. I also like to have in my window my layers right there just so I don't have to keep track of which window my layers are in. They're right there on that main screen. And then there's a couple others that I don't typically use. The undo history is nice because you can click that open if you need to go back and undo something, see what you've undone. The first thing I was going to do was a black and white, and I know this is a question. Everyone in here may know how to do that, but that's one of the things that I've had people I've shown GIMP to ask is, well, how do I make it black and white? Because there's not, like in Photoshop, there's a button you can click that says black and white, and boom, it's black and white. In GIMP, it's a little bit hidden. There's a few different ways to do this, and if anyone's interested, you can send me an email and I can send you a bunch of different GIMP resources that I found online. I was going to put them all in the presentation, but I didn't have time to, so if you want to send me an email, I can send you all of those links that I've gathered on how to do this. The way I'm going to talk about today is just desaturating the image, one, because it's the one I use the most, and two, because it's also the easiest way to do it. And so basically you'll open your image the same way I showed you before. You go to File and Open, and you'll browse. It looks a little bit different than a Windows browser, but it's essentially the same thing. Find your folder, choose your image, and then it'll open it for you in this window. One of the things that you have to be very careful about with GIMP is when you first open it, it automatically defaults to that paintbrush tool, and if you accidentally click like that in your image, you're going to get spots in it. You know, undo will fix all of that, but one of the first things I do when I open GIMP is click that move tool, which you can also just hit M and that'll select it, just to make sure that if I do anything, I'm just moving it. I'm not, you know, accidentally painting black mustaches all over everyone's face, because I've done that before, and then it's really horrible when you get to the end of your image and you've got it all perfect, and then you realize the first thing you did was put a big black dot right in the middle of someone's nose or something, and you can't go back because you'd have to undo everything. So to change the image to black and white, to desaturate it, you'll just choose the Colors menu, and then right there is Desaturate, and it'll ask you if you want to choose a shade of gray based on lightness, the luminosity, or the average. I usually just leave it on lightness because that's the average, and then hit Desaturate, and there you go, is a black and white. That's the easiest way to do it in GIMP. One thing though, a lot of times I like to play with mine after that just to kind of kick them up a little bit, because if you look at that image, it looks a little bit flat. And so the way you can do that is you can change your contrast. So if you go into colors and brightness and contrast, that'll let you adjust the contrast of your image and also the brightness. So a lot of times I'll just bump that up just a little bit so it's a little bit brighter, because I like the bright black and white pictures. Just, you know, however you want to do it. It's kind of a personal preference. And then another thing I like to do is adjust the levels of the image. That's one of the nice things about GIMP versus, say, like a Photoshop Elements. With Photoshop Elements, it doesn't quite give you a lot of the levels and curves and a lot of the more advanced photo editing features, whereas with GIMP you have those, so it's a little bit more comparable to the high-end Photoshops. If you go into colors and levels, what you can do with this that's kind of neat is you can take your little black dropper right there and pick a point that you think should be black on your picture. So like I'll try this. I don't know if I can see that close enough to get it right there, the inside of her eye. And you click that and that'll just make it a little bit more dramatic, I guess. And again, you don't have to do any of this if you don't want. A lot of times the desaturate will work well enough for that. You can choose a dark point and a light point, and it'll pop that up a little bit darker. If you want to see, I guess I could reopen it real quick again, just so we can see what that looks like versus the original desaturate option. There's the original, there's our edited black and white, and then here's what it looked like when we first desaturated it versus playing with the contrast. So it's not a huge difference, but in fact it's really hard to see on that screen, but it is just a little bit darker in the darks in the new one. So that's the black and white. Any questions on that? Anyone? Okay. The next thing that a lot of people like to do with the colors is to do a sepia colored, if I can find my sepia colored one, sepia colored picture. So let me open one of those really quick and we'll do one. Oh wait, I called it that. Sorry, I forgot I called it something different. So for sepia, GIMP has a built-in filter that will kind of make your image a sepia tone. It's under the filters menu, and then it's under decor, and they call it old photo. And I usually just leave everything default if I'm using this. Click OK, and you can play with those settings in there if you want. See what those look like. It's under filters. And then under decor, there's one called old photo. Yeah, it uses the scripts, which for me are kind of hard. I've tried to write one. I haven't figured that out yet. I'm still working on that, but it'll take just a minute to run, especially if your computer's slow like mine. But what that basically does is when you go into those filters, it's kind of like Photoshop has actions. GIMP has, they call them script foos, and they'll do certain series of actions to your photo. If you know how, you can write those and just to have it write your own. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'm working on it, but maybe by next year I'll know how to do that. But you can see it. It'll actually show you what it's doing. It's doing a bunch of different things to the photo as it's working. Working slowly. Just waiting for Windows to crash so everyone can look at me and go, I told you so. You know. Close a couple of those. Well, it's closing that picture. It might close everything. We'll see.
Resize the picture smaller.
It's going. It's just. This computer is just about on its last legs, so. This script, it actually opens up in a new window for you, your new image that's old photoed or kind of sepia colored. It is, and that's one thing that anytime you read a tutorial, they always suggest, you know, make a copy of your background layer or do it on a. I don't usually, because I don't save it as the same file name. I do what I need to do and then I save it as a new name. So that's probably a good idea though, to make sure you're working on a copy or that you're not going to accidentally save it. So that's what their sepia looks like. It's okay. I'm not really a huge fan of it. And so what I usually tend to do is something that someone had taught me. It's called a chocolate black and white. And the way you do that is if you go into, first we start by making it black and white again. So just take your image and desaturate it to make it black and white. Come on. Try shutting PowerPoint, see if that helps any.
Although on this picture, it looks like it's taking up a lot, right?
It is. So we've got it black and white, halfway anyways. I'm going to close this new one too. Everyone saw what that looked like, right? Well, actually we'll try leaving it open for just a minute because I want to compare what they look like before, what the GIMP script looks like versus what my manual tweaking looks like.
Tell me where you found the directions for this chocolate. Do you remember?
Someone told me on a message board
Oh,
how to do it. They told me basically in Photoshop. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll read the Photoshop tutorials and then I just go figure out how to do them in GIMP. So it was a Photoshop action that someone had and they said, here's what I think it does, and so I've kind of played around with it till I got it to look like how I wanted to. You make it black and white, and then you go in under colors to the color balance and choose that, and that'll open up the color balance menu, which is really good too. This is something you'll use like if you've got a photograph that's got like a red cast to it or a yellow cast to it, you can use this to kind of bring that back to more of a natural coloring. But for this one, what you'll do is you'll turn it, the top and the bottom lines, you'll push one to the red and one to the yellow. And once you do that, once it runs through that, this always takes a minute on mine just because, like I said, my computer's slow and I've got all these windows open. But you'll end up with kind of a reddish, yellowish colored picture. But it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of a brown, but it's obviously either a reddish or a yellowish tint depending on your original picture. Once it completely opens up and you've got it done, you can play with these settings here to make them more brown. The red bar and the yellow bar down there. Basically, you start with your excuse me. Red. The top one over on the right. Yeah. You'll start with that, push clear over, and the other one on the bottom pushed all the way over to yellow. And then I usually just slowly bring them in like this together till you find a color combination that looks good. And you'll see a lot of the, oh, don't send, it's not going to do us any good. But a lot of the pictures that I put up, like the baby pictures, the announcement pictures, those were all done with that action. So that's what it looks like once you're done with it. It ends up looking, it looks more like a black and white, but it's not quite as harsh. It's more of a brownish color. And you can play with that brown to make it look like however you want, but you can also compare that to, you know, theirs is a little flatter than what I like. It's not quite as bright. So that's the chocolate black and white. You can kind of keep playing with that. Some pictures it's a lot more well suited to than others. So You just have to kind of play with it and see which one you like better. But again, that's in the color balance, and it's just playing with that red and yellow coloring until you get a good combination that makes a nice brown. So, any more questions on the? Yeah, make sure you say okay. I actually do that on a lot of them. I click cancel, but once you click OK, it'll have it like that for you, and you can save it, same file name, a different file name, however you want. So another thing we were going to talk about is the layers. GIMP is like Photoshop in that you can do multiple layers of a picture if you want. One thing I've heard that people say is it doesn't have effects layers, I think is that what they're called, effects layers? So like you can do like a soft light layer, a hard light layer, and it just adds that effect to your picture. But one thing I've found that I do a lot with GIMP is it does allow you to use layers, and it does have layer modes. And so if you click that list right there on your layers window, you know, it's got like a normal layer mode, dissolve, multiply, divide. Each of these do a different thing. And so what I like to do, like this is a picture I took while I was up flying with my father-in-law. It might not be as easy to tell on the screen, but it's really kind of faded and drab to me. So I make a duplicate layer usually when I do this so that I've got two layers. And then I take the top one and I'll just adjust that layer. You can do a multiply and it instantly looks a lot better. Basically the multiply just darkens your colors. There's a mathematical formula for how it does it, and you can find that on pretty much any Photoshop website, but it'll darken your colors. But a good thing to do is to take a picture that you have and go through and look at what each of these things does. It is right under, there's normal, dissolve, and then it's the first one in that next group. Find it? One thing that I saw that was online that was a really good tutorial for me was they just took like a blue layer and then a white layer on top of that, and they went through and did all of those different effects to show you what each of those did as you were going through. Because like the multiply, it takes the top color and multiplies it by the bottom layer and some number, and then so that's why it essentially darkens your colors. The divide, it takes your top layer and divides it by your bottom layer, and that's why when you do it, you come out with nothing, because it's dividing out all of the colors. But probably of all the modes, multiply is the one I use the most, especially for things like that where you want it to be darker, more bright. It's also really nice. In a minute I'll show you, we'll talk about the layer masks. So if you've got a picture like that you really want your background to stand out and be bright, but you don't want your subject to be really bright, you can put a new layer on top and brighten it, and then just take it all out so that everything is bright except for your subject. So again, it doesn't, to do a different layer mode, you have to actually have something in that layer, but you can do a lot of the same type of stuff as you would do with the layer effects in Photoshop. So again, there's the normal, the multiply. One thing that's nice about the layers is actually over here they've got these little eyeballs on them, and that just means they're visible. So if you wanted to see what something looked like, say you did this and you wanted to see what your original looked like again, if you click that little eyeball, that just hides that layer so you can't see it. So you can hide it and make it visible again just to see the difference. Another thing is if you did something like that, your layers have an opacity too. So if you did something like this and it was too bright or it was too much and you just want to tone it down a little bit, like you only want a little bit darker, you can change how much of that top layer is showing. So there's a little bit on the layers. The next one we'll talk about is doing partial black and white with part color. And these are pretty popular. I've seen a lot of, like a lot of the professional studios will do these too, where you've got a picture and you want to make everything black and white, except for, like in this one, I'm going to leave the duck yellow, but we'll make the rest of the picture black and white.
I got a quick question.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm a huge Photoshop fan because that's what I did school for, so I've never used the GIMP, but I kind of want to try them both out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I do in Photoshop for some of my pictures, it's called the dream effect. And what it is let's say you have a picture, like the model that you can take pictures of, desaturate it, and then, so you make a copy, so you have two,
Uh-huh.
the original, two of the original, desaturate one of them, and you put it on top of the other, so it goes with desaturating with the original.
Uh-huh.
And then the bottom one, you put a, how do you say it? It's a, I call it Gaussian blur, but I don't really know how to say the word.
Gaussian.
That's Gaussian blur. And then you use, it's called a blending mode. I think it's those modes that you're talking about of, like
Yeah,
overlay.
where is the Gaussian blur?
The Gaussian blur, it's under, if you go to filters and then blur, there's a Gaussian blur right there. And if you pop that up, it'll pop up a dialog box and it'll ask you, you know, it'll show you a little preview. Unfortunately, it's like a tiny little section, but it's good because you can see, you know, what it does. You can set how many pixels you want it to blur. Do that if you want, and it'll.
But I'm just curious if GIMP is able to, I call it the dream. What it does is when you blend the two modes together, desaturating the original and the color with the blur, it creates almost like a cloud.
Yeah. I'm not sure. It doesn't specifically do blending modes, but let me come talk to you afterwards, and I'll see if I can.
I would almost guarantee that there's a Python plugin.
That.
All kinds of plugins.
There are a lot of plugins, especially if you have it as an action in Photoshop, that it does that. There are plugins that'll run Photoshop actions on GIMP. I don't have them on my computer, but most things I'm able to find some kind of workaround to make it work. So I don't know. I'll have to try that one and see if I can get it.
Decision of spending a lot of money for CS2.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to look at that because I don't know specifically. Usually when I'm following the Photoshop tutorials, because there really aren't a lot of GIMP tutorials online, so I'll just look at the Photoshop ones and kind of, yeah, and some of the things are different, like there's some things you can't do, but you can kind of make it work. So I would have to look at that specifically to see if I could, but I'll see, come talk to me afterwards and I'll see if I can do that. See if I can figure it out. Ducky. Okay, back to the duck. So to make it, first we'll do it black and white, desaturate it. Just do it real quick like, oh wait, sorry. This is again where you want to make a duplicate layer before you start your thing. Because we're going to leave our color layer behind, and then we're going to put a black and white layer on top. And basically what we're going to do is we've got the color in back, and we've got the black and white on top, and then we're going to erase off the black and white where the duck is essentially what it is that we're doing. So you'll make a duplicate layer, and to do that, just down here in your Layers tab, there's a little window that, or a little button that looks like two screens, kind of. To me, that's what it looks like, two little computer screens or two little pictures. And you click that, and it'll make a duplicate image, a duplicate layer. If you want to, you can go to Edit Layer Attributes, and you can rename it if you want. I usually don't, but if you've got a lot of layers, it might make it easier for you to tell what's what. Another thing that's, when you're working with layers, that's really important is to make sure you've got your right layer that you're working on. So if I were to click in this one and then start working on my picture, it would change my bottom layer. If I click up here, it'll change my top layer. So, you know, if I were to click in my background layer on accident and accidentally change that to black and white instead of my top layer, I'll show you what that would do. It wouldn't do anything because I still have the color layer on top. If you do that and you want to move your layers around, you can just go like that, pull them up and down, so you can flip them around like that. So now we've got two layers. We've got a color layer on bottom that's now named black and white, and then we've got a background layer that's black and white. So what we're going to do is we're going to erase off the top layer. And one way you could do that is you can just take your little eraser and if you go in the tool thing, you can make this is where you can scale your brushes. It'll start with one size, but you can make them you know, bigger so that you can kind of see. Maybe that's easier to see on that. You can kind of see that circle there is my brush. Is that even? Oh, and you know what? I'm on the, nope, I'm on the right layer.
I think it's the background layer. You did both A's and alpha.
Yeah. Oops. Let me just redo what I was doing here. So like he said, your background layer is the one that they've got named as background. They've got it set as the alpha channel. So if you move that one up, make sure you leave the background layer the way it belongs.
I'm sorry, which one needs to be set as the alpha channel?
The background layer. And I think you can reset it if you click and you can go alpha to selection or remove alpha channel. So,
What exactly is the alpha?
I don't know exactly.
Allows transparency.
I was gonna say,
An alpha channel is like a fake color that is really just transparent.
Oh,
So it makes
okay.
it so you can see through layers.
That's what that's called.
I was gonna say, I know a lot of things you have to set to an alpha channel or make it your alpha channel, but I don't know all the technical why that is. So that's good to know.
You have 32-bit color when only, 24 are actually used for colors. The last 8 are alpha.
So like we were saying, you can just take your eraser tool and start erasing this if you want. The problem with doing it, and it'll work like this if you're very careful. The problem is, say something comes along, or if you're like me and you're the only person in the world who uses GIMP with a touchpad and something bumps you and you go like that, then you end up with quite a bit, and there's no easy way just to undo that. You can hit Control Undo, but then that undoes all the stuff that I just did. So the way I like to do this is to put a layer mask on my layer that I'm going to be erasing. And basically what a layer mask does is you put it on. Let me show you here. We'll just, you click the layer you want your layer mask on, and then you right click, and you can click Add Layer Mask. And basically a layer mask is just a mask that you put on, and anything that's white,
I'm not finding add layer mask.
when you right click on your layer,
Oh, right click on the layer.
yeah, in the layer dialog. The layer mask is basically, it's a mask, and anything that's white, your bottom layer is not going to show through. Anything that's black, your bottom layer is going to show through. So you look at basically how much of your bottom layer do you want to show through. In our case, we just want that little duck to show through. So I want most everything to just be white so that it doesn't show through.
I missed the part where we were getting a layer mask. Where
Uh-huh.
do you go to get that?
Right over here on the layer, in your little layer window,
Okay.
if you right click on that, and then there's an option for Add Layer Mask right there. Sorry, I don't know the Mac, so if it's different keys, I'm not sure. Another way that I've heard it explained is one of the tutorials I read that said the layer mask is kind of like a sheet. It's white, so if you've got this white sheet over your bottom layer, you can't see it. But anything that's black, it's like you're burning a hole in that sheet. So if you burn a hole in that sheet, then your bottom layer will show through. So you can see over here on the right, it's got my layer mask, and it shows me what my layer mask looks like. Basically, it's showing me a white square, which means that my entire bottom layer is hidden. You can't see anything. That sheet's covering the whole bottom layer. What I do to show my duck, where I want to show my duck in color, is I choose the paintbrush tool, which is that one. It looks like a little paintbrush. And then if you click over here, it'll show you what size your brush is. And I usually bump mine up pretty good, because a lot of them, the defaults are pretty small, and I'm too lazy to go in and pick a different brush. I just scale them up. But once you do that, we're painting black. The colors that you're painting with, it'll show them right here. This is your foreground color and your background color. You're painting in your foreground color. So when that black is on top, that means you're painting in black. And so when you paint black over your layer mask, it's actually, you're just burning that hole in your sheet and letting the bottom layer show through.
Better than just erasing?
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. The nice thing about this is that if, because I'm just painting this black on, someone comes by and bumps me and I go like that and I go, oh man, I drew out of the lines, you can just switch colors and paint white back on over that where you've messed up. GIMP, because I don't have a mouse, I've learned a lot of the keyboard commands because it's faster for me. If you click X, that'll switch your colors back and forth. So you see where my black and white are switching up there, my foreground and my background. So I'll just put my white on my background, and then I can just go like this. Paint white right back over that, and you're good to go. The thing that's nice about that as opposed to erasing is because usually when I'm doing this, I'll zoom in pretty big so that I can see what I'm doing. You know, I'll zoom in right here, and I'll be painting like this, and usually what I'll do is I'll go out like that. You know, it's not a really obvious, you know, huge thing that you're going to have to paint a bunch over, but it's just enough that you see it there and it's going to bug you. So if you just go back over with your white and, you know, cover that up, it's a lot easier than hitting, you know, undo, and then you've undone half of what you've painted already.
Is there a way to zoom in to where you can actually see the pixel?
Yeah, you can go in, I think, like 800%, and it's pretty, I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but I can see pretty close. I mean, I can see the actual pixels on mine. And a lot of times I do. I don't know if I don't usually go into 800, but I'll usually go into about.
How are you doing that zooming?
Down here at the bottom, there's this little button right here that you'll zoom in and out with.
Can you use it to like click on an individual pixel?
You might be able to if you selected a small enough brush. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Mhm.
Something that I've found, I just recently discovered layer mask when I was fiddling around with this, and another advantage is you can halfway make something visible. If you use a gray,
Yeah,
instead of
a gray will work.
you can change how the bottom layer is going to show through.
Yeah,
Lets you do some
if you wanted to play with, like say you've got your layers, like we did that multiply, and we were playing with the opacity on that. If you only want like part of you want it to halfway show in part of the picture, you can use a gray over that, and it'll change the opacity of that section of your layer. So as you're doing this, one thing just to look at, you can look at the layer mask right there, and it shows where we're just painting. If you want to see what it looks like, you can do a show layer mask like that, and that'll show you what your layer mask looks like. It's just white with where we've painted black on it. And this is the part, it's a little bit, if you want it to look really nice, it takes a little bit of time because you have to be careful. You have to zoom it in, get your brush down small, and kind of paint those strokes in. But you know, once you get really good, you know, what you can do is a lot of times I'll just outline, like I would do an outline of the duck really fine, and then I would just open this up as the layer mask and paint black inside of that so that I don't have to sit there and try and figure out where the duck is.
If you do an outline, can you do a fill type option?
You can, yeah. What you could do is you could just do like if I did an outline, and then I could just take, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take, like in my duck, like this, and then just pull over, you can grab the color and just pull it in right there like that. So if you wanted to see what that looked like just on the duck, oops.
So how do you get that screen?
This black and white one,
Yes.
you right click, and then you go show layer mask. Yeah, and the same thing to get rid of it and go back to your picture, you just right click and then uncheck it. But a lot of times what I'll do too is I'll go like this and just draw like inside of my duck like this. I know this is all colored stuff. And then I've got an area right here that I've selected. Grab my black, pull it in there like that. And then I can do the edges. So it kind of depends on how I feel. Sometimes I'll go around the edge and then fill in the inside. Sometimes I'll fill in the inside and then go around the edges really fine. Once this is all done, this takes a little bit of time, so I actually did one yesterday that I saved. It'll look like that, and you can see if you look at my layer mask, it's got it where just that duck shape is filled in. No, now we're gonna crash. Very slowly. So you can see just right there where I've got my color, it's painted black. One thing that I like to do when I do a layer mask is I like to do a Gaussian blur on my layer mask before I apply it. Just because if you look, let me go back to the non-layer mask. If you zoom in and you look at this, you can kind of see like it's a really harsh edge right there, like it's, you know, da-da-da, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like not a real smooth edge. And so what I'll do while I still have the layer mask on is I just do a filter and then the Gaussian blur. One thing that's kind of nice is it's got your last options up here, so you can go repeat or reshow. If you reshow it, it'll just bring up the window for that, and you can change your settings if you want. That way you don't have to go through the menu. But I just do like a 5-pixel Gaussian blur on it just to kind of soften it up a little bit so it's not quite such a harsh transition between your color and your black and white. And I mean, you can see it doesn't really look that much different on the screen, but I mean, it's a little bit more soft than just a really harsh transition there. So once you've got that done, and you can do more, there's some cases where I do a little bit more of a Gaussian blur, sometimes less, just depends on what I'm doing. Once you've got it all done and you're all set to go with that, you can apply the layer mask, which is the same thing, you just right click and you do apply layer mask. Real quick, just a note about saving files. Most of your pictures that you'll pull in off of your camera are the JPEG files, so the .jpg. GIMP, you can open JPEGs, you can save them as JPEGs, but just like Photoshop has the PSD and Microsoft Digital Image has the PNG files, GIMP has their own file extension that supports layers and everything, and it's called an XCF. So if you were working on this, like I was working on this yesterday and I had it, you know, halfway finished, you have to make sure that when you do your file, you save it, you do a file and a save as, and then make sure you save it as whatever .xcf. You can save it as a JPEG, but if you do that, it'll flatten it and you'll lose all of your layer information. You know, your layers will go away basically, and then you'll be starting from wherever you were again. When I do a project, I'll usually save my files. Even when I'm done, I'll save them as both the XCF format and then a JPEG so I can print them. But that way, if I ever decide I want to go back and change something, I can go back to the XCF and modify my layers.
You said that you can just take the, so in this picture you have the yellow duck.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to take that to say Walmart or something and get it printed, would you copy the XCF file or
The JPEG. Yeah.
You wouldn't have, but based on what you just said, you wouldn't have the black and white and the color. You wouldn't have that layer. You would be back where you started.
When you, it'll merge them. It'll merge them. You'll be back. You would be back where you were when you left off. It'll flatten it so that you have no layers. So if I was,
You'll still see the same picture.
yeah. So if I was, okay, let me show you. So if I was halfway done, say I had this duck halfway done, and I got tired and I was going to go to bed, and I saved it just as the JPEG. what it would do is it would flatten it, and I would have a black and white picture with a half-color duck. Yeah, there would be no way to go back. It wouldn't have the color layer underneath anymore, so you wouldn't be able to go back and restart that.
Just don't save
Like
it black and
compiling it and losing your source code.
Sure.
So just don't save it as a JPEG.
Don't-
until you're done.
Exactly, yeah. Don't save it as a JPEG until you're done. So when you do go to save it, the easiest way when you do your save as is just put in your file name .xcf. If you want, you can do it, like you can select the file type down here, but I usually just type in, whatever .xcf, and then you don't have to mess with this. It defaults to whatever it was when you opened it. If it's a new file, like you just open a new image from nothing, create a brand new image, it would default to an XCF. But like when I pull in a picture from my camera and it pulls it in as a JPEG, it'll pull it in as a JPEG and try to save it as a JPEG, and you have to make sure you change that. Even a lot of times I'll shoot pictures in RAW on my camera, and when I pull them in, it'll pull them in and it'll try to save them as like a RAR, as a RAW file format, and my computer doesn't support saving them as whatever the Fuji RAW file type is. So,
I have a question. What if you have some Photoshop files that are .psd?
it will open.
The XCF.
Uh-huh. It will open them. It will open them. I'm trying to think if I've done PSD ones. I know I've done PNG ones from like Microsoft Digital Image Suite, and it'll open those with all of the layers and everything.
Can you save it as a PSD?
You may be able to.
Yes, you can.
I was gonna say I've never had a reason to. I don't know why you couldn't, but I would think you could just type that in at the end, and yeah, there's the PNG. Did I pass it?
Photoshop image.
Oh, yep, there you go.
How do you do it?
Yeah, as you say, all the ones I've opened that have been Photoshop images have opened okay, but I've never tried it going back the other way from GIMP into Photoshop. So the main thing is just make sure if you do end it halfway, whenever you're saving, make sure you check what extension you're saving your file with, so that it's however you want it. If you want it as a JPEG, or if you want it to be able to come back and do layers later, or if you want it as a Photoshop one, so you could open it in Photoshop and play with it there.
Just another quick note about saving. I don't know if the Windows or Mac version does this, but in the Linux version, at least last time I checked, you can save it as like an xcf.gz for anyone here that uses gzip. It'll actually save it and then compress the file so it takes up less space as well. I don't know if the Windows or Mac version does that. The Linux one does.
I would bet it.
Mac would, I would expect would.
I would think it was, because I've used it on Linux and in Windows, and I haven't noticed much difference between the two at all, actually. So I've never used it on Mac, but
I would expect the Mac to, but I don't think Windows would do it. I don't.
Either way, it's kind of a handy tool if you're low on disk space.
yeah, like this one is. So once that's done, once you've got your thing and you've got it the way you want it, you can apply the layer mask, and basically that just cuts the hole into your picture where you've drawn your black space. So if we were to take out the black layer, you can see there's my top layer with just the little hole in it where the duck was. And then there's my bottom layer added on. Once you're done, I usually will merge my two layers together, and you can do that, right click, and then you can do a flatten. If you've got multiple layers and you only want to merge one to the other one, you can just click merge down, and that'll merge the one layer to the next layer. But if you flatten it, that'll flatten it, and then you've got your one image there you can save as a JPEG and take to Walmart or wherever.
If you save it as a JPEG though, doesn't it do that automatically?
Flatten it, it does. It'll ask you, it'll say we cannot support all of your layers. Do you want to flatten it, export it? So like this one, let me undo that. If I were to just save this right now, it's an XCF with multiple layers. If I were to save it as a JPEG, like that, it would come up with this warning that would say, you know, your image should be exported because it can't handle the transparency. And you can either, you know, export it or ignore it or cancel. So if you just export it like that, it'll flatten it for you, yeah. And then it'll also ask you, you know, what quality do you want? I usually, most of mine I'm saving to print out at a, you know, a high size, big size, so I save it at the high quality. And then got your picture. The other thing layer masks are kind of handy for is there's all kinds of things you can do like that. Like I was saying before, if you wanted to just brighten the colors on something, say you've got some pretty green grass out behind you and you want to brighten your colors, you can do a multiply layer. But then that'll probably make the person that's in your picture look really red, so you can do a layer mask and erase them out, so you've just got like a nice bright green background and the person's their normal coloring. Another thing that I've done a lot, let me close some of these because like I said, I'm kind of afraid it'll crash if I don't, is I'll blur the background if I get a picture that, you know, I like a lot of stuff in it, but I don't like the background. Or a lot of times if I take a picture and my foreground is in focus, but my background is kind of a little bit blurry, you know, just enough that it kind of looks bad, but I want it to be more blurred. You can do the same type of thing. Do a duplicate layer. So you make your new layer. And then what I do on that is I'll do my Gaussian blur. Oh, and I hit repeat instead of reshow, which is what I should have done. If you hit, there was two options up there. There's repeat, and that just repeats it at your last settings. And there's reshow, and that just brings up the same tool, but lets you fix the settings. So, so we'll just do this example right here. You know, we want it to be a little bit more blurred, so maybe I'll even do like a 10, just see what that looks like. Blur it. If you go to filters, you'll have two options. You'll have repeat, and repeat will just run it again at the exact same settings. If you do reshow, that'll just bring up the tool menu again, so you can tweak. Like if you want to run it once at 5 and once at 10 like I just did, you would want to do reshow. So this, now you've got it blurry, and this is where you would do, you know, you could do your same thing with the layer mask, and I would, you know, take out the baby so that she was in focus and the background was all blurry. So you could do that. One last thing, it looks like we have about 10 minutes left that I wanted to show was replacing heads in photos, because that's something, I don't know, I get asked to do it a lot, but this is one from a wedding we went to a while ago. We've got two of the pictures. They're the exact same picture. You can do this if they're not the exact same picture, but it's a lot easier, and especially you know, in the age of digital cameras, I know everyone takes, you know, 5 different pictures of the same shot. And so a lot of times we'll end up with like this where, you know, we were looking at this picture and we go, well, you know, everyone looks pretty good in this picture except for, you know, Grandpa, he looks like he's about to be run over by a truck. And then in this one, you know, okay, everyone looks pretty good in this one except, you know, Aunt over here, she's kind of got a frown on her face. Her face was much better in the other one. Let's you know, swap out her head. It's the same lighting. You can do it if it's different pictures, but like I said, it's a lot easier if it's the same lighting and they're in about the same position, just so you don't have to do a lot of tweaking. So the way I like to do this is I'll take the one I want to move. I'm going to move her head over onto the other picture. So I'll come in kind of close on her picture, again, just doing that zoom. And right now I've got that freehand lasso tool, which is an F if you want to use the keyboard shortcuts, the lasso tool. And then I'll just draw a little lasso around the area where I want her, that I want, which is this. You know, I try to take, my rule of thumb usually is take as little as you can, just because it's easier to match up if you don't have to try and match up other things. So once you do your little lasso, you can see the little dots around her head. That's my area that I've selected. I'll just do a Control-C for copy. And then over here in my other layer, I'll do a Control V for paste. One thing that's really important when you're pasting things into pictures in GIMP like that is that you'll see it comes up with this little anchor thing here, and it'll want you to anchor that thing you pasted somewhere. If you just click in your picture like that, it anchors your picture to wherever it landed when you pasted it, which can be really frustrating. So I'm going to hit undo on that. What's a good thing to do is whenever you paste something in, even if I know where I'm going to paste it and I think I can kind of line it up, I always paste it in on its own layer so that I can move it independently. So as soon as you hit paste and you've got it on there, if you hit Control-Shift-N, that makes it a new layer, and then you can see I can move it. The other thing, if you don't like the keyboard shortcuts, is you can just hit the new layer button once you paste it, and that'll pop it onto a new layer too.
What did you didn't clone the layer, you just created a new layer? Is that what you did?
I just made a new layer with that head on it. Basically, it anchored what I pasted to its own layer.
Wouldn't it be easier in something like this to just do a square selection rather than because match it up with like the background?
It might, depending on hers. It was kind of tilted, and it would probably work about the same for me. I usually have better luck, kind of lining them up with a non-square selection. It just depends on how if they've moved their heads at all or anything. But a square selection would work fine too. Okay. Did you have another question too, or a comment, or? Yeah.
I was stretching, I'm sorry.
Okay. Just making sure. Just making sure. You've had good comments, so I just want to make sure we catch them. So again, on this, we've got the the head on there. Let me see. And so we make sure we line it up. You always have a little bit of differences, like this has got a little bit of difference in here, but usually you can do a pretty good job getting it lined up in the right spot. And I probably didn't take a very good selection. Your selection is really important, what you choose as your selection, to make sure you can get it lined up like that. And then once you've got it lined up, what you end up with is just, you can, usually once I've got it lined up, I'll take my little blur brush right here, your little smudge tool, and then just kind of smudge my lines a little bit just so it kind of blends a little bit. You don't always have to do that, but it sure helps if there's any kind of a line there. And then when you're done, you'll end up with a head on there. And it's not like, especially this one because we only did it in 5 minutes, but it's not perfect. If you look close, you can probably tell it's photoshopped, but sending it into Walmart and printing it out at a 4x6 size, no one's gonna know. So if I blew this up to like 11x14 and got out a magnifying glass, yeah, you'd be able to tell, but otherwise it'll do a pretty good job swapping out the heads for you. So that's it. I think we're almost out of time. Are there any other questions I can answer before we go? Yeah.
Removing wires, like telephone lines in the photo, do you mask those, or what would be the easiest way to do that?
Depending on what you've got, like is it just sky around them, or a lot of times what works really well is the cloning tool, which is this. It looks like a little stamp right here. Yeah, that's a good idea. So if I wanted to get rid of her necklace, what I would do, I've got my little clone tool here, and I usually, with the clone tool, I like to do a pretty big brush if there's room for it, so that I can cover most of what I want to hit, like this. You choose a source image. So basically, one thing that you'll notice on GIMP that's different than Photoshop is you hit Control and click to select your source. Is that the same as in Photoshop? Is it Control? It's Alt in Photoshop. So you'll hit Control, and a lot of times if you've got your tool, like your clone tool, you'll notice down there at the bottom it says Control and click to set a new source. So hit Control and you click right there. So that's the area it's going to copy from, and then I'll just. Is it going to work since I have keys going? Oh, it's not. You're right. I do that a lot. Select none. So then you can just kind of, and like for this one you would have to move it, like I would have to move my source because.
And that works better if you put the opacity at like 40%.
Yeah. But basically you just pick your source and then just clone it out clone out the wires. And if you've got, like we did one the other day when I was helping my cousin with it, like she had a piece of trash on the beach behind her. You know, you just take a big spot, choose a spot, just click it right over the sand. You can't tell that it's been cloned out like that. So. That's it. Any other questions or? Okay. Like I said, if you want, you can email me, Glenda. You can either do glenda@watanko.com or glenda@UtahOpenTech.com, and I can send you a list. I've got probably, I don't know, I've got several websites that I found that have GIMP tutorials and just different photography tutorials that I can send you. So. I don't. My husband has one upstairs. You can get his and email me
just
too.
a quick announcement before we thank Glenda. We are doing smokehouse barbecue upstairs, and at the registration desk you can get your meal tickets. It's $3 if you have cash. If you use a card, it's going to be $4 for the fee to do it online, which is great because yesterday we were planning on charging you guys $5. So $3 or $4 is a pretty good deal. So go up there and get your meal ticket and come join us for some smokehouse food. And you guys will join me in thanks, Glenda. And there's also comment cards, rating cards would be great. So you guys can do that too.